तुम बिना लागे सुना, तुम बिना लागे सुना, खाली घट में प्रेम भरो, खाली घट में प्रेम भरो। प्रभु जी दया करो, प्रभु जी दया करो, मन में आन बसो। तंत्र मंत्र पूजा नहीं जानू, तंत्र मंत्र पूजा नहीं जानू, मैं तो केवली तुमको ही मानो, मैं तो केवली तुमको ही मानो। सारी जग में ढूंढा तुमको, सारी जग में ढूंढा तुमको, अब तो आकर बहादुरो, अब तो आकर बहादुरो। प्रभु जी दया करो, प्रभु जी दया करो, मन में आन बसो। तुम बिना लागे सुना, तुम बिना लागे सुना, खाली घट में प्रेम भरो, खाली घट में प्रेम भरो। प्रभु जी दया करो, मन में आन बसो, मन में आन बसो, मन में आन बसो।
Beautiful. So friends, this is part 2 of managing the mind. We're spotlighting the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. So just a quick review. There was a lot to take in. In the first part, yoga means concentration, becoming one with the object of thought, or our true nature. And we can perform concentration on an object of the world, or we can perform concentration on God. Its procedure is to raise our thinking and becoming one with the object of thought. The yoga system was not created by Patanjali. It was a revealed truth. It is a revealed truth. It uses an investigative approach, and it's put into a rational, sequential manner, and it became a system for us to reach the goal. There's not much philosophy or psychology discussed. It's not intended to change our beliefs, but expose ourselves to Ishvara, the personal God, and receive numerous options for self-development. I'm going to quickly review the verses, the sutras 1 through 12. Patanjali, in the sutras 1 through 4, summarized the yoga system. When there is a cessation of thought waves in the mind, one's nature is revealed. When they're not stilled, our true nature is obstructed. It's as simple as that. How does that help us? Sutras 1 through 4, Patanjali defined the goal and the obstruction to the goal. The next verses reveal point by point the nature of the obstruction, the thought waves themselves. Sutra 5 explains that there are two types of thought waves, painful and non-painful. Sutra 6 delineates the 5 kinds of mental activity within us: the knowledge, misapprehension, verbal delusion, sleep, and memory. And Patanjali then analyzes in Sutra 7 what brings clear cognition, direct perception, inference, and proof of right knowledge from the scriptures or the words of a seer, the words of our guru. In Sutra 8, indiscrimination allows us to misread an event or an object, and the example was given of mistaking a rope for a snake. In Sutra 9, Patanjali presents verbal delusion. We accept news at face value rather than questioning it. Sutra 10, sleep embraces voidness. It is not samadhi. Though in deep sleep, the ego is not projected, the self is veiled, except, of course, for those great rishis that we exemplified in the last session. In Sutra 11, we understand that memory allows us to re-experience past events. And then to summarize, we have understood the types of thought waves that obstruct our true nature and disturb the mind, and what mental faculties we can develop to still the negative thought waves. In verse 12, we learn in the meantime that thought waves are brought under control by practice and non-attachment. So we begin this second part with a breakdown of how to control the movements of the mind. Sutra 12. In the meantime, thought waves are controlled by the practice and non-attachment. Sutra 13, Tatra stitau yatno bhyasaha. Continuous struggle to keep the vrittis restrained is called abhyasa. So the mind is in constant motion. Even in deep sleep, there is some level of activity. When we awake, the mind's normal state is distracted. There's a constant internal chatter. To stop the movement of an object, we hold it steady. The same principle applies to the activity of the mind. To check the fluctuations of the mind stimulated by externals, we try to make the mind one-pointed. Swami Brahmananda said in the Eternal Companion, even after 1 year of steady practice, you will find some result. Why? Faith. Devadatta Kali. If the mind can be held in steadiness in one thought alone, it will no longer jump about. There still will be activity of a sort, but it will be singularly focused and subdued. So the concept of our true nature increases the more we go deeper within our being, and it grows along with our continuous practice. The more effort we make, the more we leave old thought habits that get in our way behind us. It does work. My teacher used to say, "It does work, my child. It does work." So what is renunciation? Let the vrittis remain. There's nothing wrong in having thoughts. Thoughts can't be destroyed. It's the reaction to the thought, the indulgence and interest in the thought, and the imitation of the thought that disturbs us. So when thoughts arise that are negative, be the witness. Just as you witnessed your mind in the opening meditation of the first part in this series, be the witness. You are not your thoughts. Is there a positive, gradual way to develop renunciation? In Sutra 14, Patanjali tells us, Satu dirgha kala nairantarya satkara sevito dhrita bhumihi. It becomes firmly grounded by long, constant efforts with great love and devotion. So we can't expect a quick fix. It takes months, it takes years. But again, Brahmananda said, if you have not had some practice, some experience, some evolution in 3 years, you can come back and slap my face. See? So we can't expect a quick fix. It took many years and lifetimes for us to get to this point. We've not disciplined our mind, so yoga must be practiced with regularity and consistently over a long term. It's like raising a child. The child doesn't come into the world perfect. Sometimes it has tantrums. Even in the airport, I saw a child having a tantrum. And so what did the mother do? She acted like a yogi. She stood there over the child. The child was acting out on the floor, kicking and screaming, carrying on as our mind does. And she simply watched it and stood over it. A crowd gathered around her. The plane was ready to board. She didn't move. She just stood and watched the child. And eventually the kicking and screaming subsided. And then she picked the child up in her arms and boarded the plane. So this is how we must treat the mind, like a child having a tantrum. And patiently watch it until it exhausts itself. And then with spiritual jujitsu, we turn it in a new direction. And we must recognize the value of what we're doing. Then we take it seriously by steady commitment. Sri Ramakrishna was an exemplary renunciate of lust and greed. Pratap Chandra Mazumdar wrote about Sri Ramakrishna. For a long time he practiced a singular discipline. He took in one hand a piece of gold and in the other a lump of earth. He would then look at both, repeatedly calling the gold earth and the earth gold, and then shuffling the contents of one hand into the other. He would keep up the process until he lost all sense of the difference between the gold and the earth. Practice and non-attachment. This demonstrates a lofty example of commitment and steadfastness until the goal was revealed. With the repetition of the mantra, how can we bring love and devotion into our practice? Many of you have been initiated. The repetition of the mantra can become mechanical, but it's not thoughtless. Every repetition is going into the mind and having a transformative effect on future samskaras. We can take the mantra with us wherever we go. So constant practice is possible. And conviction comes with initiation. At that time, we feel the support of a sacred lineage. And while repeating the mantra, we keep the mind alert and remind ourselves of the chosen ideal that the mantra is symbolizing. And with repeated effort, there's a cumulative effect. The practice adds up. The more practice, the easier it becomes. And with results, we become firmly grounded. Sutra 15. Drishta anushabika vishaya vitrishnasya vashikara sangya vairagyam. That effect which comes to those who have given up their thirst after objects, either seen or heard, and which wills to control the objects, is non-attachment. Every object, every experience is stored in the mind as a mental impression. It's here. And these mental impressions rise to the surface with new experiences. And they determine how we act and react in the present. So mental conditioning causes attraction and repulsion to things internal, thoughts and memories, and external objects of desire. For example, if we're addicted to chocolate, even the word chocolate causes our mouth to water. So dispassion is freedom from reaction and lessening of mental activity. And that is when we begin to control our thoughts and feelings. We begin to develop serenity. Sutra 16. Tat param purusha kyater guna vaitrishnayam. Extreme non-attachment gives up even the thirst for the gunas, which comes from the knowledge of the Purusha. So dispassion gives us a new frame of reference for looking at life. We're no longer under the sway of the gunas, tamas, darkness or inertia, rajas, attraction or repulsion, and sattva, the equilibrium of the two. The factors and forces of nature, which includes the mind. As we become grounded, we enjoy life in a new way. We become dispassionate towards reputation and honor. For example, it's a wonderful example, when Swami Suhitananda was General Secretary, they came to the US, he brought his attendant with him, and his attendant told a wonderful story of a very revered Swami traveling to Western countries in Western clothes. And this was done especially in the early days in the 60s and the 70s, and up until about the mid-80s. And when the Swami returned to India, he was greeted by sadhus who took the dust of his feet. Some onlookers snickered. See how the Bellarmat Swamis are attached to such big donors as this man must be. They even take the dust of their feet. Swami Suhitananda was delighted to hear the story about this revered and senior sadhu who simply was returning from the West in Western clothes and honored by the sadhus who met him. So we become dispassionate towards any disturbance. There's a wonderful example. Hridoy was ordered to leave the Dakshineshwar compound for a misdeed that he had committed, and the temple guards mistakenly asked Sri Ramakrishna to also leave. Without a word of protest, Sri Ramakrishna put the towel over his shoulder, left his room, and walked towards the gate. What a wonderful image that is in the mind. Trailokya, the son of Mathur Babu, the proprietor of Dakshineshwar, saw him and shouted, "Sir, where are you going?" And Sri Ramakrishna answered, "You told your guard to order me to leave the temple compound." Trailokya was embarrassed. "No, sir, I didn't. Please come back. The guard made a mistake." Smiling, Sri Ramakrishna turned around and returned to his room. When the mind is steadied, it develops a larger sense of being. In verse 17, Patanjali explains, Vitarka vichara ananda asmitanugamat sampragyata. Here we're getting into the real thing about the stages of realization. Patanjali explains the samadhi endowed with right knowledge, it is that which is attended by reasoning, discrimination, bliss, and the unqualified ego. Now, these are just words, so let's deconstruct. Sampragyata can be understood in two ways. The first interpretation is sampragyata has been translated as cognitive. Cognitive insight unfolds one step at a time in logical, systematic way. In ordinary consciousness, our attention shifts from one thing to another. Real attention is rare. For example, the yoga process of deepening the range of our cognition through abhyasa, steadiness, and constant practice is vitarka, to direct the mind to a particular object and try to focus there, which is what you do every morning and evening in your meditation. You're trying to do that. What happens? The mind is trying to meditate upon an object again and again, your chosen ideal, by isolating it from other objects. For example, if we try to focus on the sky and try to hold our attention, we try to hold our attention on the thought of the sky. That's what's happening in our meditation. But then other thoughts arise, such as clouds. The clouds are not the sky. These associations give rise to other associations, and soon we have forgotten the sky. But when we are finally able to still the mind of other thoughts, which takes practice, thoughts of the sky are continuous. They're more focused, and there's a continuing attentiveness which brings forth a deeper, more lucid understanding of the sky itself. This deeper insight brings joy. Joy was always there. This is real joy, a deeper joy. Joy was always there within us. It's the Ananda part of Satchidananda. But distracting thoughts had covered it up. This is called the joy of concentration, dharana. 12 seconds of unbroken concentration. Vitarka is like holding the pot, and this is a reference to Buddha. Is like holding the pot, and this is a reference to Buddhist scripture. Vichara is like scrubbing the pot to remove all dirt. And again, this refers to Buddhist scripture. Ananda refers to beholding the shine of the pot, and again, it refers to Buddhist scripture. And Asmita, I amness, does not refer to Buddhist scripture, which we will discuss later. Most of the time, in the state of vitarka, we're still aware of our own existence and that we're trying to meditate on an object. So we have a knower, an object of meditation, and a process of knowing. We go deeper. Vichara is a continued exercise of the mind on that object alone, the commentators tell us, along with a dawning awareness of its properties and nature. In other words, if we're meditating on Sri Ramakrishna, we begin to feel the presence of Sri Ramakrishna. What is that presence? Love. We feel the solid presence, and that love uplifts us. So the form begins to melt into the formless reality. And this gives rise to Ananda. Asmita, this I amness, is the bliss found in the causal sheath, the Anandamaya kosha. Now, the second interpretation of some pragyata translates directly as samadhi, and this is a translation that I hold. In my particular case, this is what I gravitate towards. According to Vyasa and later commentators, there are 6 degrees of lower samadhi in ascending order. Savitarka is concentration on a gross object. Say it can be a patch of skin on the back of the hand, a dot, a sound. What is the process? The mind moves from being spread out to being collected and pinpointed. The mind is forced to move in one direction, not seeing or hearing simultaneously. Interest draws the mind totally towards the object. Some vritti continuously is generated in our mind. The same vritti is continuously generated in our mind. And the chitta, which is the lake of the mind, takes the shape of the only form of that object. This is what's happening in our meditation. Several moments, seconds, minutes pass, and we're able to increase our capacity to hold on to the object of concentration of our liking. Our attraction and affection for it increases our involvement with it. That's why devotion is so important. Karma yoga is so important. This capacity of the human mind is available to all. The result is that though the mind becomes absorbed, time, space remain to some extent. The object remains. For example, when Swami Bibekananda was annoyed by the jute mill whistle, Sri Ramakrishna asked him to meditate instead on the sound of the whistle, and he achieved much benefit. Okay, that's savitarka. Then we come to nirvitarka samadhi. When savitarka state of meditation deepens and matures, what is the process? We have the capacity to lose ourselves in the object of concentration. It may not be in the heart, it could be the beauties of nature, as I shared with you at Trinity, such as Ansel Adams, the photographer, who had the vision of light and tried to relive that in nature by photographing it. And the nature mystic, John Muir, he experienced that, and he would hug a tree in a thunderstorm to feel its prakriti. When that capacity is cultured and discipline is followed, then we can hold the mind on the object for a prolonged period. It's easier to concentrate if we can choose an object that attracts us and we take advantage of our attraction. And that can happen in the arts and the sciences. Yes, some of the great artists, scientists, composers, even conductors have had that capacity. Wilhelm Furtwängler's creative musical genius is a prime example. Although he was not an adherent of Nazism, in fact, there are videos showing him of Hitler attending his concerts and Hitler wanting to shake his hand and Furtwängler having to hold out his hand, but then afterwards with a handkerchief rubbing off that handshake on camera. He was a leading composer and conductor to remain in Germany during the Hitler regime, and therefore he was ostracized from coming to America. But it was because he was named the principal conductor of the Berlin Philharmonic, the world's finest philharmonic orchestra at that time. A first violinist in the orchestra shared a story about his greatness, that all musicians in his orchestra felt music had a living quality of its own. At one music program, the orchestra started playing the opening overture to a piece without its conductor, without Furtwängler present. They were playing, and suddenly the quality of the music changed altogether and uplifted them all. The first violinist and others turned and saw Furtwängler enter and realized the music was coming from him. So why is it important to concentrate in meditation for a prolonged period of time? Because without such practice, we won't attain any great depth and involvement with the object of our meditation. Unless we are committed to concentrate wholeheartedly, the object won't unfold its mystery, which it holds within itself. When our meditation deepens, a sense of time and space become diminished, and we begin to see the object as it is. We develop penetrative attention, so one-pointed, it pierces the covering of ignorance of the object. The object gives up its mystery. The object, say the dot on the back of the hand, the dot alone shines. There's no longer a sense of you and the dot. Only the object is. The result? Time, space disappear on the object. Only the object remains on its own. Now we enter into vichara, savichara. One becomes absorbed in the domain of abstract ideas with a concentration on a mental abstraction, such as the mental image of, say, Sri Ramakrishna's form in the heart, or a sound, such as mental japa, the mantra. The process is the 5 sense organs are no more involved. They're concentrating on ideas. The mental image of Sri Ramakrishna is also an idea, ideation. We take the sense of seeing or hearing, we concentrate on that until we hear the humming sound of the inner ear. But the experience of Sri Ramakrishna in the heart, we have that until he seems intensely present and living. His whole body appears vividly. The results? We, the meditator, lose the sense of time and space to some extent. We're vaguely aware of the ego, aware of the object, the idea in time and space. There's a wonderful example of J.C. Bose, the international scientist in Kolkata who won the Nobel Prize. He determined plants have life and respond to stimulations. And this story that I'm going to tell you was shared by Lady Bose and handed down to Swami Sridharananda, who later shared it with me in Dallas in 2008. The Swami, I was invited to speak at a college, and he told the students that it's possible to have these experiences in the arts and in science. And I was curious. I knew about the arts, but what about science? And so he told the story. When J.C. Bose was immersed in research, he went through the process of vitarka, which I've just explained to you. He was submerged in his scientific experiments to find out the secret of consciousness in plants. Again, sampragyata means that object unfolds the mystery that surrounds it and gives itself up. It gives itself away. Every day after breakfast, J.C. Bose would go to the Institute, and at 1 p.m., Lady Bose would go to the Institute and bring lunch. It's time for lunch, she would say. Sir Bose was reluctant to leave the lab one day. He said to her, "You have lunch. I'm right in the thick of my experiment. Leave my food in the anteroom for me to take at my leisure." 3 days and 3 nights, the food remained untouched. Sir Bose was so involved in solving the mystery of whether plants have life, he lost track of time and his body requirements. On the 3rd day, his face beaming with joy, J.C. Bose came down from the Institute and told Lady Bose, "Not only have I discovered that plants have consciousness, I have discovered the reality behind that consciousness." Boshi Sen was J.C. Bose's protege, and he later related to Swami Pravrajika. Once Maharaj, Swami Brahmananda, expressed a desire to see some of Bose's famous experiments showing the sensitivity of plants to external stimuli. When he visited the Institute, he watched the experiments we demonstrated for him with great interest. That evening, he was still preoccupied with what he had seen in the laboratory. There was a time, he told me, this is J.C. Bose writing, when Sri Ramakrishna could not step on the grass, but would jump from one bare spot to another to avoid hurting the grass. At that time, we simply didn't believe that grass could be sensitive. From what I saw today, I realize how infallibly true his perceptions were. A little later, he added to J.C. Bose, "Don't give up your science. You will get everything through it." Now we come to nirvichara. This is the stage when awareness, time, space, and small self are almost lost. In the same meditation, our concentration deepens and we lose our sense of time and space, and the aspirant sees the fine elements as they are. In savichara, we can experience Sri Ramakrishna in the heart until he seems intensely present and living. His whole body appears vividly. In nirvichara, one no longer feels, "I am seeing Sri Ramakrishna." The aspirant sees only the form of Sri Ramakrishna. That alone shines. The I almost disappears. Then we come to Ananda, bliss. Gross and subtle elements are given up, and the object of meditation is the interior organ, the buddhi, the higher mind, which you were using in that opening guided meditation. Bereft of all thought activity and dullness, the buddhi is the part of the mind, again, that is in the heart, where spiritual experience takes place. The aspirant meditates on the bliss that was experienced from the form of, say, Sri Ramakrishna in nirvichara, meditation on the bliss itself. This is so subtle. So the faculty of experiencing that bliss becomes the object of meditation. In other words, the aspirant has gone beyond meditation on a gross object and then mental abstraction, and now concentrates on the mechanics of mental movement, the bliss. Subtler than the domain of ideas means more excess of sattva is manifest in this concentration, and there is a greater enjoyment of bliss that is experienced in this stage. The results? Euphoric ecstasy and joy. One loses body consciousness in videha samadhi, but the aspirant is not yet beyond the orbit of prakriti and can have a fall. There is generated a tremendous capacity to concentrate on anything, but if not disciplined, an enormous outflow of energy can go in a downfall, in a downward direction. This Ananda Samadhi, sometimes called Sananda Samadhi, has a capacity to stop further growth. It needs willpower, tremendous willpower, such ecstasy that the aspirant can deceive him or herself that they have reached the goal. So that is a common stumbling block. Then we come to Asmita, the unqualified awareness of my amness. The meditator has gone beyond the Ananda Samadhi, from concentrating on the mechanics of experiencing Sananda, this bliss, to the root cause of the experiencer, Asmita, that sense of I am. What has transpired? Meditation on the buddhi itself has deepened to the point where in the sattva stage of ego remains. The knower is bereft of all body consciousness. There is a sense of having a fine body. This is savikalpa samadhi. This is a higher stage than savichara and nirvichara. The I am of Vedanta comes from the Atman, the Purusha, but ultimately disappears in the Atman. It is an intuition of the Atman. Ramana Maharshi said, hold on to the I am. That will take you to the Atman. But in the self, there is no I am. This Atman, this Asmita is reflected consciousness of the Atman in the buddhi. It's reflected consciousness, but doesn't yet know it's infinite because of the buddhi, which is individual. It's the knot between consciousness and buddhi. It's a very high level. It's a root of the individual is tied to this knot between consciousness and buddhi. Ecstasy and joy of Ananda Samadhi is gone and it's replaced by tranquility. The whole cosmos ceases to exist for you, and there comes with that an indescribable peace. One is aware of Prakriti and Purusha, of Vyakta Bhumi, merged in the unmanifested Prakriti, the universe. Powers come. Whatever you wish or say at that time will happen. There's a tremendous amount of power that is generated, and unless an aspirant is disciplined, one can slip and have a fall. So the aspirant must maintain a strong sense of vairagya, renunciation. This aspirant can look back many lifetimes. Awareness has broken all limits of space and time. One becomes aware of previous lives, because one with eternal Prakriti, Pravrajika, one says enough is enough. There is no desire to reincarnate. One knows the root of this universe. There's an example. Swami Brahmananda had that power, as we read in the Eternal Companion. Abani, the future Swami Pravrajika, sat cross-legged in front of Maharaj, with Maharaj's feet resting on his knees. Swami described something inexplicable happened to him, though he felt it was Maharaj's doing. In Pravrajika Swami's own words, I found myself in a condition in which I was talking and talking, forgetting my usual restraint. It seemed to me that I spoke freely and even eloquently for a long time, but I do not remember what I said. Maharaj listened and said nothing. Suddenly, I returned to normal consciousness and became aware of Maharaj leaning toward me and asking with an amused smile, "What did you say?" I then realized that I had addressed him as Tumi, the familiar form of you, which is used in speaking to equals and friends. At this, he seemed to lose all interest in the conversation and sat upright again. I can only assume, Swami Pravrajika said, that Maharaj wanted to corroborate his own intuitive knowledge of my past lives, and that he therefore put me into this unusual state of consciousness in which I was able to tell him what he wanted to know. Sri Ramakrishna did the same thing to Naran with a touch, and Naran lost all consciousness. Sri Ramakrishna later told his monastic disciples, I asked him many questions, such as who he really was, where he had come from, why he had been born, how long he would stay in the world, and so on. A third example we find in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4, verse 5. Sri Krishna tells Arjuna, "You and I, Arjuna, have lived many lives. I remember them all. You do not remember." Sutra 18. Parama pratyabhyasa purvaha samskaresho nyaha. There is another samadhi which is attained by the constant practice of the cessation of all mental activity, in which the chitta retains only the manifested impressions. Okay, let's try to deconstruct this verse. Sampragyata is the experience which generates itself from complete, unambiguous knowing. That knowledge matures into the experience which removes the secrecy that surrounds the object from the grossest to the subtlest in Prakriti. The differences between sampragyata and asampragyata samadhi are this. The first difference, sampragyata is the object of concentration, is one of the gross objects of the world, physical objects. Asampragyata destroys the last bond with the world, ahamasmi, by our mind. At the time of Patanjali, gold was purified from ore. When gold is purified, acid which is poured on the alloy and over the dirt neutralizes itself, and what remains is pure gold. The acid is something different, but in alchemy it burns out all dirt, and in the process it becomes neutralized. So also our intention and willpower to free ourselves will burn itself off, and we are what we are remains. The second difference is that in sampragyata, Sri Ramakrishna described the experience in the Agya Chakra as like a glass separating the Purusha from light. In asampragyata, there is no glass separating us from the Atman. In Sri Ramakrishna's life, he experimented with apparently conflicting points of view. Totapuri, for example, came from the Punjab searching for a sadhu, with features showing he was ready to be initiated into Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Sri Ramakrishna was waiting for him. Totapuri said, "You seem to be highly qualified. Are you interested in Nirvikalpa Samadhi?" Sri Ramakrishna said, "My mother knows." He went to the Kali temple and asked Mother Kali and returned, "Yes, my mother agrees." 3 days' time, the mind was destroyed. The master was given directions to stop formations of the vrittis, but he always saw the luminous form of Mother Kali and got stuck. 3 times he cried, "I can't go on beyond my mother." Totapuri then took glass and pierced between the eyebrows and told Sri Ramakrishna to meditate on that sensation. And the sensation was so piercing, he could not take his mind away from that chakra, nor allow it to be taken away by Mother Kali. He cut her form with a sword and entered the doorway to the Absolute. What happened was, when he saw Mother Kali's form, that piercing sensation overrode it, and he was then able to cut the form. And he merged into Nirvikalpa Samadhi. There was no mind to create any vritti. Virama pratyaya abhyasa purvaha, a continued effort to still all thoughts, is the yoga technique. Manasa, the mental power or spiritual mind, is the Vedanta technique. The last link between this world and Nirvikalpa Samadhi is Asmita, I amness, and that is removed by Aham Brahmasmi. No one can express what happens to oneself because the mind is not there. The vritti that helps us to translate the experience into the words has dissolved. Patanjali says, I can't tell you the joy of that experience, but I can tell you how to reach that. Shankara would say, take an earthen pot and make holes in it, and then put the lamp inside. All holes show the effulgence within you. The attainment of the spiritual oneness shows through the luminosity emitted. So the results? We must know reality behind the appearance, the unity behind the diversity. For example, when Sri Ramakrishna couldn't eat, the disciples requested him to ask the Divine Mother. And he said, Mother showed me I was eating through so many mouths. In this state, we lose the identity, our self-identity, and become one with the cosmos. We shed all limitations. One day, Sri Ramakrishna was eating, and he asked for salt. And Sarada Devi said, there's no spice in the salt rack. Sri Ramakrishna became annoyed and irritated. What do you mean there is no salt? Never say the word no. Always be positive. And we experience our true nature, free from time, space, causation. As the Mundaka Upanishad so beautifully phrases, the knot of the heart, which is ignorance, is loosed. All doubts are dissolved. All evil effects of deeds are destroyed when he who is both personal and impersonal is realized. And now I'd like to end with a guided meditation by Swami Bibekananda, which he gave in his Jnana Yoga class. in his words. So let us sit straight, chest slightly forward, feet flat on the ground, hands in our lap, loosely held, and begin by taking in 3 deep breaths, breathing in deeply and exhaling completely. First, Bibekananda tells us, we begin our meditation by negation. Think away everything we are not. Analyze everything that comes in the mind by the sheer action of the will. The body drinks, eats, and so on. I am not the body. I am not the mind. I am not thought. I am He. Next, assert what we really are: existence, knowledge, and bliss. Being, knowing, and loving. Meditation is the means of unification of the subject and object. Meditate. Above, it is full of me. Below, it is full of me. In the middle, it is full of me. I am in all beings, and all beings are in me. Om Tat Sat. I am that. I am existence above mind. I am the one spirit of the universe. I am neither pleasure nor pain. I am He. I am the witness. I look on. When health comes, I am the witness. When disease comes, I am the witness. I am existence, knowledge, bliss. I am the essence and nectar of knowledge. Through eternity, I change not. I am calm, resplendent, and unchanging. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So thank you, everyone.